knee-deep in lake water, pulling a rotted dock plank off a frame that had been neglected since probably the Mulroney years, when a silver SUV turned down the gravel road like it had made a wrong turn somewhere between Bay Street and the rest of the world. I watched it from the water. The dock we were repairing sat at the edge of a property outside Kenora, northwest Ontario. 3 hours from the Winnipeg border and about 100 years from anything resembling a boardroom. My crew was 2 guys, Curtis, who was threading new galvanized bolts through the frame, and my brother-in-law Hector, who was arguing with a drill that kept stripping screws. The SUV stopped near our truck. Nobody got out for a moment. Then the passenger door opened. The woman who stepped onto the gravel was wearing a wool coat the color of birch bark, dark trousers, and shoes that had no business being on a lakeside property in early October. She looked at the dock, at the lake, at the 2 guys on the dock, and then she looked at me, standing in water up to my knees, with a pry bar in one hand. "You Cormac Finley," she called across the water. "Depends," I said. "You hear about the permit?" She did not smile. "My name is Leonie Ashford." I knew that name. Most people in northwestern Ontario who worked in heritage property knew it. Ashford Retreats. 6 lakeside lodges, 4 of them registered heritage properties, 3 of them on the Canadian Register of Historic Places. The family had been operating in the region since the 1950s. Her grandmother had built the first lodge with a loan from a Crown land program that no longer existed. The lodges were in every tourism brochure the province printed. I climbed out of the water and stood on the dock. "What can I do for Ashford Retreats?" She looked at me for a moment. Her hands were wrapped around a leather portfolio and her jaw was set in the way people hold themselves when they have already rehearsed what comes next. "I need a husband," she said, "before Friday." Curtis dropped his wrench into the lake. I looked at her. "I think the wrong gravel road brought you to the wrong contractor." "It didn't." She stepped toward the dock. "I know what you do. You specialize in heritage restoration, docks, structures, log buildings, original materials. You turned down a contract from Ridgecrest Developments last spring when they wanted you to strip the original pine from a 1920s lodge on Lake of the Woods and replace it with engineered flooring." I remembered that. The project manager had called 3 times after I said no. That's public knowledge to about 4 people. I talked to all 4. I walked off the dock onto the bank and looked at her properly. She was maybe mid-30s, no jewelry except a watch. Her eyes were calm in a way that meant she had been through something before this and had decided not to show it. "Tell me why." "My grandfather's estate has a succession clause," she said. "The controlling shares of Ashford Retreats passed to me permanently on my 35th birthday, which is Friday. But the clause was written in 1987 and it has a condition. I have to be legally married before I receive full control." She paused. "My grandfather believed a person running a family enterprise should have a partner. He thought it would keep the business grounded. He was wrong about many things, including that, she agreed. "If the condition isn't met, controlling shares pass to my cousin Bryce. Temporarily. 60 days. "What happens in 60 days? Her mouth tightened. "He sells Wabigoon Lodge and Otter Creek Retreat to a numbered company out of Calgary. They've already applied to the municipality for a demolition permit. I had worked inside Wabigoon Lodge the previous winter. Replacement of original chinking on the main structure, restoration of the stone fireplace, rehanging of 4 doors that had been hanging wrong since the 70s. The place was 1930s hand-hewn log, white spruce, the real thing. The kind of building that took 3 generations to accumulate character and about 6 months of neglect to start losing it." "Why me?" I asked. Leonie looked past me toward the lake for a moment. "Last year, Bryce approached your company through a property management firm. He wanted you to quote on removing the original dock structures from Wabigoon and replacing them with pressure-treated composite." I remembered the email. I had not known whose property it was. I had said no because the original structures were restorable and the quote was asking me to destroy something that didn't need destroying. That was his inquiry? Yes. "You declined without asking what the budget was." "The budget wasn't the issue." "I know," Leonie said. "That's why I'm here." I looked at her shoes again. They were going to be ruined if she took another step toward the bank. "You researched me." I had to be sure. "Sure of what? That Bryce couldn't buy you? He can buy most people. He's very good at finding the number that works." She held my gaze. "I needed someone he couldn't get to." Behind me, Hector had stopped arguing with the drill. I could feel both of them listening. What do I get out of it? I asked. A legal agreement, she said, written and reviewed before anything is signed. Your company is protected. Your property on Clearwater Road is protected. There is no claim on your assets, no liability for Ashford business during or after, a flat fee for the time this requires, and a clean, no contest dissolution once the shares transfer. You've got a number ready. I have several, but I noticed you didn't ask what it was. I had not. I was looking at the portfolio in her hands and thinking about Wabagoon Lodge and the way the light came through the south-facing windows onto floors that had been walked on for 90 years. I want the truth first, I said. Everything you left out because you thought it might make me say no. For the first time, something shifted behind her eyes. My grandfather built Ashford retreats on the assumption that everything could be managed, she said. Staff, guests, land, family. He made my mother sign a document when she married my father saying she would not inherit anything if they divorced. They divorced when I was 9. My mother got nothing. She looked down at the portfolio. Bryce grew up being told the business was his by right. He never actually worked in it. I spent 4 summers during university repairing docks, cleaning boats, managing bookings, learning every property. My grandfather saw that and still wrote the clause the way he wrote it, because he believed a woman running something alone was a liability. The wind came off the lake and pushed through the aspens along the bank. Old trees don't lie about the weather. You understand, this pulls my name into your family's history? Yes. My crew. My company. If Bryce decides to make it ugly, the noise lands on them too. Yes. And if it goes wrong, people won't say you chose me because I was the right person. They'll say you bought a dock repairman? Her chin moved once. I know. I looked back at Curtis and Hector. Curtis was staring at the lake with a very deliberate expression that meant he was absolutely listening to every word. Hector had given up pretending entirely and was just watching us. All right, I said. Leonie looked at me. All right, I'll hear the rest, but I have one condition first. I pointed toward the road. You come to my workshop. You meet the people this decision affects before we go anywhere near a courthouse. She looked down at her shoes and then at the mud near the waterline. Fine. Not fine, I said. You stand where I stand. You see what you're asking me to risk. Then we talk about Friday. She nodded once, and something in her shoulders dropped slightly, not relief exactly, more like she had been holding a door closed for a long time and someone had finally pushed from the other side, behind me. Hector said quietly, Cormac, what is happening right now? I picked up my pry bar. Change of plans. I dried off and changed in the truck cab while Curtis very professionally organized tools he had already organized. Leonie waited by the SUV with her phone and the expression of someone who was used to waiting for things to catch up to her decisions. I had clean jeans in the back, a flannel shirt I kept for site meetings, and boots that I wiped down on the wheel well. I still had lake grit under my fingernails, and my hair was damp. I figured that was accurate. She rode with me. I had made the workshop condition, and she had not tried to negotiate it into something easier. That told me something. My workshop sat behind the main road in a converted equipment building I had leased going on 7 years. The sign outside said Finley Heritage Works. Black letters on cream, faded enough to look like we meant it. The yard had salvaged window frames stacked against the wall, a stack of hand-hewn timber waiting for a church restoration in Fort Francis, and a birch bark canoe in various stages of frame repair that I had taken on as a favor for a regional museum. My apprentice, a 22-year-old named Vaughn, who was more careful with a hand plane than anyone I had ever hired, came out of the shop with a coffee. He looked at the vehicle. He looked at Leonie. He looked at me. He decided the coffee was for himself. I walked Leonie inside. The table saw was running in the back room. The radio was on, some CBC morning program that nobody had changed in 3 years. There were timber profiles tacked to the wall, a chalkboard with a job list, invoices on a clipboard, and a half-finished window sash on the bench that Vaughn had been fitting for 2 days. This is what gets caught in your story, I said. Vaughn has a student loan and a truck payment. Curtis has 2 kids in Kenora and a mortgage he refinanced when the pandemic hit. Hector is my brother-in-law and he works here because he's good at it, not because I owe him anything. If Bryce decides to make your family business my problem, it becomes their problem too. Leonie looked at the job list on the chalkboard. She walked along the bench and looked at the window sash without touching it. "What's this for?" she asked. "Church in Fort Francis, 1901 building. Original sash. The previous repair used the wrong species. We're correcting it." She looked at it for another moment. "You used the original species. When we can find it, sometimes we can't and we use the closest thing. But we don't fake it." I watched her. There are contractors who will tell you matching paint is the same as matching material. It isn't. You can fool the eye. You can't fool the wood. She looked up at me then, and I could not quite read her face. "Bryce hired someone like that for the Otter Creek boathouse last year," she said. "New lumber, painted to look old. It's already warping. It'll be unlivable in 4 years. He said it was cost-effective. He was wrong about the cost." Vaughn appeared in the doorway with 2 coffees after all. He handed one to Leonie without saying anything. She took it and said thank you, and he nodded in that way young tradespeople do when they have decided someone is acceptable. We left for the city at 11. Leonie had arranged an independent lawyer, someone who had never done work for Ashford Retreats, to meet us at an office near Portage Avenue in Winnipeg. 3 hours in the SUV. She drove. I looked at the land going by and thought about what I was walking into. At the office, a lawyer named Ms. Mina's. Okafor went through the agreement with me page by page while Leonie waited in the reception area and did not interrupt once. The document was 41 pages. It protected my company. It protected my equipment. It protected the Clearwater Road property that my father had bought in 1994 and that I had been making payments on since he passed. It protected me from any liability arising from Ashford business decisions during or after the arrangement. Miss Ed. Okafor looked at my paint-stained fingers and said, "You understand this is legally binding." "I do. And unconventional." "I work with century-old buildings," I said. "Unconventional is relative." She almost smiled. "Sign here." The courthouse in Winnipeg was quiet on a Thursday. No ceremony. No guests. A registrar named Mr. Beaumont who looked like he had married several hundred couples and found every one of them equally credible. He read the required language. I said yes. Leonie said yes. There were 2 witnesses, Ms. E. Okafor and Leonie's assistant, a calm young man named James who had been managing her schedule since we left Kenora and had not once asked what was happening. Then the registrar asked about rings. Leonie went still. James whispered something to her, and she gave him a look that ended the conversation. "I didn't prepare for this part," she said quietly. I put my hand in my jacket pocket. My father's ring was there. I had not planned to bring it. I carried it most days because it was easier than leaving it somewhere and wondering where it was. A plain band, silver, worn on the inside where decades of work had polished it smooth. "We can use this," I said. Leonie looked at it in my palm. Her face changed slightly, the way faces do when something real interrupts a plan. "Are you sure?" "It's a ring," I said. "We can sort out the rest later." When she slid it onto my finger, her hand was steady except for the last moment, when it wasn't. I noticed. I did not think she knew I noticed. Mr. Beaumont said we were married. We drove back that afternoon. The light was going by the time we reached the turnoff for Kenora, the sky doing that thing it does over the Canadian Shield in October where everything goes amber and copper and then just gray. Leonie was quiet for the first hour. I was quiet for the second. Somewhere around Dryden, she said, "I want you to know I understand what you gave up today." "I didn't give up anything yet," I said. "You gave up the right to have this be simple." I looked out the window. Spruce and birch and rock and the occasional flash of water. That lodge was never going to be simple, whatever Bryce was planning for it. She did not answer for a while. Then she said, "My mother loved Wabigoon. She used to take me there in the summers before the divorce. There was a screened porch on the east side that my grandfather kept meaning to repair. She used to sit on it anyway and read, even with the boards loose. After the divorce, she was never allowed back. I kept my eyes on the highway. Old wood always has a story underneath the surface story." The board meeting was Friday at 2 in the afternoon at the Ashford family solicitor's office in Winnipeg. Bryce was already there when we arrived, sitting beside a man in a suit who I did not know and who did not introduce himself. Bryce was tall, comfortable looking, the kind of man who had been told he was reasonable his whole life. He looked me over the way people do when they are pricing damage and have been doing it so long they don't know they're doing it. "Leonie," he said. "This is unexpected." She set the marriage certificate on the table. "The condition is satisfied." Bryce looked at the certificate, then he looked at me. "You married a dock repairman, heritage restoration contractor," I said. The room went quiet in a particular way. Sorry? Bryce said. Heritage restoration contractor, I said again. If you're going to describe me incorrectly, I'd rather you use the full title. One of the older people around the table looked down quickly. Bryce's easy expression held. He looked at Leonie. The clause requires a legally recognized marriage entered in good faith. I'll be asking our counsel to review whether arrangement of this nature qualifies. Gordon has already reviewed it, Leonie said. Gordon was the family solicitor who had, until this moment, been looking at a spot on the wall behind Bryce's head. He now opened a folder. The certificate is valid. The timing satisfies the clause as written. The shares transfer to Leonie Ashford Finley at the close of business today. Bryce leaned back in his chair. He looked at me with the specific patience of a man who has decided he will wait. What did she promise you, Mr. Finley? Nothing that would interest you. Try me. I looked at him. A fair agreement, which you wouldn't offer. His mouth thinned. You expect us to believe this marriage is genuine. I expect the legal documentation to speak for itself, I said. What you believe is your own concern. Gordon laid out the paperwork. The transfer was completed at 4:47 in the afternoon. Bryce stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Leonie. You've created a mess. I protected the property, she said. You were going to sell them by Christmas. That landed differently than anything else in the room. Bryce left without responding. I thought we had gotten through it cleanly. Then, at 6, the next morning, a story appeared on a regional news aggregator with my name spelled correctly and Leonie's name in the headline. Ashford heiress in rushed courthouse marriage. Family source questions legitimacy. By ADSO on Leonie's phone had been going for 2 hours. By 19:00 someone had called the workshop line and Vaughn had begun answering with Finley Heritage Works. We're not commenting on personal matters in a tone that suggested he was finding this more interesting than he let on. Leonie showed up at my door that evening with a duffel bag, a garment case, and the expression of a woman who had been managing other people's crises for 15 years and was now, for the first time, inside one herself. My house sat behind the workshop on the same property, a story-and-a-half frame building I had been repairing in pieces since I bought it. Good bones, bad windows, a wood stove that worked better than anything electric I had ever owned. It was small. The second bedroom I used for project drawings and overflow storage. Leonie stepped inside and looked around with the careful look of someone assessing a structure. It's older than I expected, she said. 1948, I said. Most of the original interior. She looked at the wide plank floors and the trim around the doorways. You haven't replaced any of it. Why would I? She almost said something and then didn't. I showed her the second room, which I had partially cleared. The window stuck, unless you pushed it up at the left corner first. The closet door didn't stay shut. The ceiling light was on a switch that also controlled the porch light for reasons that had never been fully explained to me. There's a spare blanket in the hall cabinet, I said. Coffee maker is the kind that needs the filter seated properly or it overflows. Just push the basket in until it clicks. She stood in the middle of the room with her duffel bag. You really know how to welcome someone. I'm new at this. That first week was not what anyone would call comfortable. Leonie had calls from her board contacts before 7 every morning. Bryce had retained a lawyer to formally challenge the marriage's validity under the estate clause. Vaughn started keeping a log of the media calls to the workshop because there were enough that it was becoming a workflow issue. Curtis, who had said almost nothing about any of it since the doc, showed up Monday morning with an extra coffee for Leonie without anyone asking him to. She thanked him and he said, "Yep," and went to work. And that was the whole of it, but I noticed. At night, Leonie sat at my kitchen table with papers in stacks that had a logic I couldn't see from across the table. I ate reheated chili out of a pot and pushed the saltines toward her. She took 3 without looking up. We did not have a romantic moment that first week. We had coexistence. She learned that the coffee maker needed the basket clicked in, or it would overflow onto the counter. I learned she made lists in the margins of documents she had already read, covering them with handwriting that got smaller the more she was thinking. She left her coat on the hook by the door instead of in the closet because the closet was still half full of rolled drawings. I stopped leaving my boots directly in front of the door after the second time she stepped over them in the dark. Small things. The kind that add up before you notice. One evening, I came in late after finishing the Fort Francis window sash and found her standing on a chair in the second bedroom trying to force the stuck window shut against the cold. The latch, I said. I found the latch, she said. The latch is not the problem. You have to lift the frame slightly before it engages. I've been lifting the frame. I came over and she stepped sideways on the chair so I could reach past her. The window needed 2 hands and a specific angle I had learned the first winter. It seated with a solid sound that meant it would hold. Leonie looked at it for a moment. I'll fix that, I said. You said that 4 days ago. I've been publicly married. She turned on the chair and looked at me, and for the first time since the dock, she laughed. Just once, surprised, real. Not the managed version. The actual thing. I fixed the window the next morning. The following week she came into the workshop with coffee from the place on the highway, one for each of us, names written on the cups because she had asked Vaughn what everyone's names were and remembered them. Vaughn held his cup and looked at the name and then at me. Curtis said, "Huh," under his breath in a way that meant something positive. Hector just nodded like it confirmed something he had suspected. She asked me what I took in mine, Vaughn said later. She has a good memory, I told him. She listened, he said. Not the same thing. I took her through Wabagoon Lodge on a gray Tuesday. The drive up the lake road in October, the way the birches had gone gold and then let go. The property coming through the trees. The lodge had been closed for the season. The air inside smelled like log, old stone, and the particular kind of cold that comes from a building that remembers warmth but doesn't have any right now. I walked her through it room by room. The main hall with the exposed log walls, the stone fireplace in the common room, the kitchen addition from the 1960s that had been done respectfully, the sleeping cabins off the main path, the screened porch on the east side, the boards still loose, the view through the screen onto the lake. Leonie stood in the porch doorway for a long time. I walked the walls and showed her what I saw. The chinking in the north wall needs to be redone, but the logs are solid. This corner here had water ingress probably 15 years ago. Whoever did the repair used the wrong mix. We'd have to open it back up and redo it, or it'll migrate. I ran my hand along the door frame of the main entrance. These are original, hand-hewn. Somebody at some point painted them, and that was a shame, but the wood underneath is fine. Strip them properly, and they'll outlast anything you could put in to replace them. Leonie put her hand on the log wall near the fireplace. My mother used to sit here, she said, right here, when I was small, before everything. I waited. My grandfather knew she loved this property, Leonie said. He took it away from her anyway, not directly. He just made it so that after the divorce there was no practical way for her to come back. She pulled her hand away from the log. Bryce doesn't see any of that. He sees a lodge with deferred maintenance and a buyer willing to pay above market to tear it down and build condominiums. I looked at the fireplace. A restoration contractor I know once said that a building isn't the material, it's the decisions people made about the material. I had said it to a client in Thunder Bay 2 years ago and meant it then too. Whoever built this lodge made good decisions. Somebody should keep making them. Leonie looked at me, and I could not read everything in her face, but I could read some of it. After that, things shifted in ways that were hard to name exactly. She started reviewing my client emails in the evenings, not because I asked. You sound irritated here, she said one night, pointing at a paragraph. I am irritated. They've asked to delay payment 3 times. You can be irritated without saying it in writing. I wasn't aware I was saying it in writing. This sentence, she said and pointed. I read it. She was right. She rewrote it, and it was better, and I did not tell her that immediately. But I used the revision. Bryce filed his challenge formally in November. The question was simple. Was the marriage genuine, or an arrangement designed to circumvent the estate clause? His lawyers asked for a deposition. We sat in a conference room in Winnipeg, Leonie and I on one side of the table, Bryce's team on the other. Bryce himself was not there, which meant he was confident the process would do his work for him. The questions were careful. Where did we live? How were household expenses divided? What were each other's habits? Did we intend the marriage to continue beyond the transfer date? Leonie answered in the even, documented way she answered everything. Then they turned to me. Mr. Inkotz, Finley, would you describe the marriage as a genuine partnership? I looked at the lawyer across the table. I would describe it as a marriage, I said, which is the same thing, depending on the day. Can you give us an example of daily life in the household? I leaned forward slightly. She reorganized my filing system in October, and I haven't been able to find the invoice for the Fort Francis project in 3 weeks. I found it yesterday under a folder labeled Q4 Follow-up, which is a category that did not previously exist in my shop. Leonie looked at the table. She drinks her coffee black until it's cold, I continued, and then adds sugar, which she feels is a private decision. The coffee maker overflows if you don't push the basket incorrectly. She figured that out on day 2 and has not mentioned that I should fix it, which I respect. One of Bryce's lawyers made a note. The other one stopped making notes. She knows which dock on Wabigoon needs redecking before spring, I said. She knew it before I told her. She walked the property in October and came back and said the 3rd dock from the boathouse, and she was right. I sat back. That is what a genuine partnership looks like in my line of work. The deposition ended 40 minutes later. Bryce's challenge was formally dismissed in December. The shares had already transferred, but the dismissal closed the question. Afterward, Leonie and I ended up in the parking garage below the building, just the 2 of us, James having gone to get the vehicle. It was cold. Our breath came out in small clouds. She was looking at the concrete wall across from us with the particular look she had when she had already worked something out and was deciding whether to say it. "You didn't have to make it sound like that," she said. "I didn't make it sound like anything." She turned toward me. In the parquet light, no board table between us, no lawyers, no paperwork. Just November in Winnipeg and the space we had been pretending not to notice for weeks. "Cormac," she said, quieter than her usual register. I did not get to answer. She stepped close and put one hand against my jacket and kissed me. It was not for Bryce, not for the deposition, not for the clause or the certificate or the family solicitor's office. It was ours, the first thing between us that belonged only to the 2 of us and nobody else in any room. She pulled back and looked at me like she had surprised herself. I said, "We should probably get out of this parkade before we freeze." She laughed and her hand stayed on my jacket for one more moment. On the drive home, she sat beside me in my truck. Her shoulder was close to mine. Every red light felt longer than necessary. When we got back to the house, she put her bag on the kitchen chair and stood in the middle of the room. I took off my coat and hung it. "We shouldn't rush this because a courthouse got there first," I said. Her face softened in a way I had not seen before. "I was hoping you'd say that. Don't look relieved." "I'm not relieved," she said. "I'm just tired of things being decided for me before I've had a chance to decide them myself. So we did it the only sensible way, slowly." She kept the 2nd bedroom for another month. I kept making bad coffee. She kept correcting my emails with the focused air of someone who was definitely only helping the business. But she started leaving her coffee cup next to mine on the counter instead of washing it immediately and putting it away. When I came in late from a site, she looked up from the table with the look of someone who had been listening for tires on the gravel but did not want to admit it. Some nights we sat by the wood stove after dinner, not talking about Bryce or the board or the properties, just talking about the church in Fort Francis and whether the congregation would notice the corrected sash species, about what was under the paint on the Wabigoon door frames, about a screen porch with loose boards and a woman who used to read there anyway. The marriage stopped being a legal position. It became a habit, and then a choice, and then something I could not imagine taking off my finger, even when no one was looking. In the spring, the Wabigoon restoration began. My company led the structural work, the chinking, the door frames, the screened porch, every board replaced with the right material in the right way. Bond spent a week on the main hall windows and declared them the best original sash he had ever worked on, which I thought was accurate. Curtis fixed the 3rd dock from the boathouse in April and sent me a photo when he was done with no caption, which meant he was proud of it. One evening in June, I came home to find Leonie at the kitchen table. No laptop, no files, no phone, one folder. That told me what I needed to know before I asked. She pushed it toward me when I sat down. "Dissolution agreement," she said. Her voice was steady, but she had been through something before I got home. I knew the signs. "The terms are clean. Miss Okafor reviewed it and I had Gordon look independently. Your company is protected. The Clearwater Road property is protected. There are no penalties, no public statements required." She folded her hands on the table. "The clause has been satisfied. The challenge is dismissed. The properties are safe. You did what I asked and more than I had any right to ask." I looked at the folder. "I don't want you staying because the started is something you agreed to finish," she said. Loyal people sometimes confuse staying with choosing. That was the truest thing she had said to me, and she had said a lot of true things. I opened the folder. Page 1. Names, dates. A clear path out of something that had become anything but clear. My father's ring caught the light when I turned the page. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. No, I said. She looked at me. I don't want the table back, I said. I don't want the second bedroom empty. I don't want to fix another window alone. I don't want to hear about the Wabagoon porch from somebody else's report. I don't want to take this ring off and tell myself it was just the practical thing we used to get through a bad clause in a document a man wrote in 1987 because he didn't trust women to run things. Her eyes went bright. Right in the comments, was Leonie right to give me a way out? Or should she have trusted that I was staying because I had chosen to? I was trying to be fair to you, she said. I know. You were also trying to protect yourself in case I said yes. I looked at her. I'm not saying yes. She looked down at the folder, then pushed it further away, like it had become something impolite between us. I don't want out either, she said. That was the moment the arrangement ended. Not in the solicitor's office, not in the deposition room, not on the date the clause expired. It ended at my kitchen table in a house built in 1948 with floors that had never been replaced. While rain came down on the lake outside and the wood stove ticked in the next room, and Leonie sat across from me wearing a Finley Heritage Works shirt that had been washed enough times the print was barely readable. After that, we stopped managing it and started living it. The Wabagoon restoration was completed by September. Leonie kept Ashford retreats together, not by becoming someone she was not, but by becoming clearer about who she was. Bryce tried once more in the fall and found there was nothing left to try. The property stayed. The family name became something that could be said without the weight of what almost happened to it. The following summer, we had a proper wedding at Wabagoon Lodge on the screened porch on the east side. The board's all solid now. The view through the new screen onto the lake just as good as it had ever been. No press, no board members attending out of obligation, no one who would come to see how it ended, just people who had been there for the parts that mattered. Vaughn stood near the front and pretended he did not tear up, which he did. Curtis showed up in a jacket and looked like the jacket had not been fully consulted. Hector gave a toast that was 4 sentences long and entirely accurate. Leonie walked across that porch without the birch bark coat, without the legal portfolio, without the careful management she used to carry into rooms where she expected to have to defend herself. I used my father's ring again. No one suggested we could take it off later. Afterward, we stood near the east-facing window, while the light went long over the lake, and Leonie leaned into my side the way she had learned to, like it was where she had always planned to be, and had simply needed to find the road that got her there. Years later, when people asked how we met, she always let me start. I was fixing a dock, I would say. And she would say, he was knee-deep in lake water and he still made me explain myself before he said yes. And that was true, and that was us, and neither of us ever wanted the story to be any shorter than it was.